ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us for today's Coresight Conversations, where we will be discussing the future of retail. We're very excited to welcome Duncan Painter, CEO of Ascential, with us today, and I'm handing it over to our CEO and founder, Deborah Weinswig.
Thanks, Anna. Good morning and welcome everyone to the future of e-commerce. I'm your host, Deborah Weinswig, and I'm honored to be joined by CEO of Ascential, Duncan Painter. From a Coresight perspective, we have hosted almost 50 digital events this year, which are available in our digital events library. In addition, we are also hosting a great research report today on the future of the home and home improvement industries. By way of introduction, Duncan has an impressive background and was very early in his pursuit of consumer insights. He joined Ascential in October of 2011 as CEO, and under his leadership, the company listed on the LSE in February of 2016. Before joining Ascential, Duncan was a managing director at Sky, where he supported their growth objectives to 10 million customers. And prior to that, he was global product leader at Experian, having made his way there via the acquisition of consumer intelligence company Clarity Blue, where he was the founder and CEO of Consumer Intelligence. Duncan is also a non-executive director of ITV. Today, we're going to discuss innovation in e-commerce, the future of e-commerce, and the platformization and some of the shopping holidays that we've seen. Lastly, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen during our conversation if you would like to ask a question, and we will get started. Duncan, thank you so much for joining us.
Deborah, it's a great pleasure to be here, and you guys have been very busy by the looks of all the research you've been publishing. So, but thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
So Duncan, you've always been ahead of the curve in everything that you've done, and e-commerce is no exception. With it really being under the spotlight right now, and this big shift from physical to digital, which has only been accelerated by the current pandemic, your Edge Ascential Insights market forecast data has really just started to update the kind of change in direction around the pandemic. What is the data showing us right now, and what surprises are there?
Well, I don't suppose anyone on this call is going to be surprised to find out that e-commerce has obviously had, a significant jump. But I think the simplest way to put it is we've had a 10 for 10. And what that basically means is we've had 10 years of shift in market share on e-com in 10 weeks. So it's been dramatic. I mean, the shift has been dramatic, and we're now looking at e-com going from 21% to 30%. If you look at some of the Asian markets, I know you're very focused on China. We're very focused on China for obvious reasons. It's the e-commerce epicenter. The reality is they're shifting up beyond 40%. So yeah, look, I think what you've seen is this huge channel shift. Of course, much of that is through necessity. The big question, of course, is how much of it drifts back. And what I can say to you is the very early signs in China is not much.
Why do you think that is, Duncan?
I think there's two rules in life that really have, if you look at everything digital, has sort of been the foundations of them. The first one is that humans roughly take 66 days to change and form habits. But after 66 days, once they've formed those habits, it's exceptionally hard for them to shift back. And so if you think about how long we've all been in lockdown, we're now well beyond day 70. So the vast majority of people have been forced, if they haven't used it before, they've been forced to adapt to it, and now they're used to it. At the end of the day, there's been one fundamental in every form of retail over the centuries, which is convenience. And there's no doubt for certain product types, e-commerce is phenomenally convenient.
It's interesting if you think about it, right? From a grocery perspective, the kind of old adage had been, right? This great focus on fresh, and that you could always pick it out better yourself than someone else who's delivering it to you. We've seen a dramatic market share shift from kind of physical to digital in a very short period of time. What do you think happens in that sector?
For fresh, or for just generally across that shift by
I think
brand?
Both.
I think it's very different. I think the key thing is to think of things by categories, because really the impact is very different by category. And I do think e-commerce works really well for certain categories. And then, in other categories, it's not as ideal. I mean, it doesn't mean it doesn't work, but it's not as effective. Fresh product, as you've said, has always been the one that has been more difficult. People do, enjoy the pleasure of picking their own fresh produce and knowing that it genuinely feels to them or seems to them the freshest they can get. But I think, again, through necessity, when you have no choice, you're seeing the difference. And then I think, organizations, I think the biggest shifter or the biggest bounce business in the last 90 days has been Instacart. And when you look at Instacart's impact on the market, I mean, basically it's gone in fresh and in those areas from number 5 right the way through to number 1. In fact, it's gone well past Walmart. So it's kind of definitely been the surprise of the season. And Instacart, I think, are demonstrating that brilliant online balance with that flexibility of, pretty much the same kind of distribution platform as Walmart with their collection of retailers, but a lot more local and a lot more selection to local collection. And they seem to be getting that balance really well. I think in the mass look, at the end of the day, Amazon is the daddy of e-commerce in the United States. There's no two ways to describe it any other way. And the bottom line is, if you are in some of the fundamental categories in e-com, you could be driving still, well, put it a different way, probably 86% of all growth in those categories this year will be delivered through e-commerce. So if you're a brand, if you're one of my clients, which we have, we currently represent sort of over 60% of the top, of the top merchandisers on Amazon in first party. We have over 60% of the top 10 merchandisers on Amazon in the world that we service and run. So we've had an absolute ringside seat. If you've been in an essentials category, there were points in the pandemic where, we described it as we basically had clients have 16 Black Fridays in a row.
That's unprecedented. It's interesting in terms of your comments. We heard from the head of e-commerce at Rite Aid on one of these calls that, they were shocked how easy it was to kind of go onto Instacart, and almost like a dream. The data that you shared is no surprise. Why do you think everybody waited so long?
To make the shift across, or to go to Instacart, or
both?
I think the big difference coming in Instacart, which is the big difference that's triggering all of it, is that, as you said, we've made bets early. The big bets we've always made are around. So our big bet in 2013-14 was that it wasn't just e-commerce that was going to win. It was actually marketplaces within e-commerce that would win. And so we've backed our tech developments and our huge capital investments around backing marketplaces. And, the big thing that Instacart have done is they've enabled brands now to self-serve in the same way that Amazon has. And in fairness, the same way that Walmart has in the last 4 months. And I think it's that directional move to self-service where brands get more in control of how they trade on those platforms that makes them so much more attractive to brand organizations, because it puts them in control of their own retail for the first time. And ultimately, if your customer algorithm led, then the brand has got to get in the stream of what customers want. Because if they're not in the stream of what customers want, the algorithm simply won't serve them up there. And you can't buy your way to the top on those. Well, you can, but it's very short-lived, right? So you can spend an awful lot of money if you want to, but you won't stay there for very long if your products aren't what customers want. So, it's interesting. I think that's what Instacart has really done, is it's shown a pathway to giving brands the ability to really leverage their system as a true marketplace. First party, but a true marketplace. And I think that's going to set their business up actually now to have 2 or 3 very solid years of growth. So I think Instacart is the one to watch. Actually, we've been massively impressed with what Walmart has been doing. So Walmart has come out with their new self-serve platform. We've had the privilege as a company. I mean, we're one of the few companies that can basically have direct API integration with our live trading platforms into these marketplaces. We've been doing that for Amazon for a number of years. We now have Walmart, we now have Instacart, actually, to be fair, Kroger have just opened up the equivalent. And when you can see the variation across those four and see the real-time trading across, thousands of SKUs, it's a different world. But you would know that well, Deborah, because it's the first time in the West that we're getting to see, the power of the Eastern platforms, capability and ecosystems come to life in Western markets. So that's they're not quite there yet, but in terms of you've seen the power of what happens when you create a genuine ecosystem like they have in China, and it is phenomenal. I mean, we'll touch on it probably later, but you're talking about single day events like Singles Days driving 50 to 60 billion of sales in a single day period.
A few comments on that. So number one, I think this idea of kind of this ecosystem, because there's great customer service, there's ease of payment, this idea of frictionless, boundaryless, new retail. I mean, that is one very interesting aspect. And then secondly, Duncan, I left Wall Street in 2013, covering kind of the e-commerce space, right? I mean, if you think about it, back then, every sentence, we'd talk about eBay. Where's eBay?
Well, I think the reality is that the pure third-party platforms have not really taken off. Right. And what's really worked through is where there has been a blend of first party. So a retail presence by the platform, taking real volume and attracting in the major brand companies that consumers want. So they're getting that huge convenience, but they're really bringing in the major brand players, because that's what consumers, those are the products consumers want to keep buying and repeatedly buying. And unfortunately, eBay was just too slow in moving in with that blend, and third party. Look, Amazon themselves have obviously seen huge third party growth, but actually that's regulating a bit now, and it's not at the same growth rates as it was a year ago. And in fact, the other really interesting thing that's happened through COVID is pretty much that middle to small middle businesses that would fill in third party have pretty much disappeared off the horizon on these live platforms. So if you're a first party major brand operating in Amazon today, auction density has never been so low, because all of that sort of middle market that would drive up that contention and kind of scrambling to get growth on the platform has pretty much disappeared through COVID.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's simple, right? It's just simple capital ability to manufacture, produce, store. COVID's, impacted that, the cash flows of those companies disproportionately to big organizations that have got instant access to liquidity, instant access to capital, and therefore could keep their operations moving. And at the end of the day, it's not a cheap game to be promoting and pushing your brands on these platforms. So you've got to have a lot of confidence and certainty. And I think the big brands have that confidence and certainty. I think middle-sized organizations have just, really, what I can tell you is what the data is suggesting is that they really aren't coming through the pandemic in the same way that the big organizations are.
It's interesting you mentioned Walmart. We've heard from many retailers who started to sell on, and brands who started to sell on Walmart for the first time, that I would say it's all exceeded their expectations. What are you hearing from your clients?
Yeah, no, look, I think, I think the Walmart team, have taken some time, let's be fair, to really get back in the game seriously with e-commerce. I mean, if you go back 12, 18 months ago, Walmart was not a competitor to Amazon. I mean, it would like to present that it was a competitor to Amazon, but just the data makes it very clear that they were not, right? Because the scale of growth rates that Amazon was achieving were just off the chart, right? So, but what I can tell you is that, Doug McMillan and his team clearly weren't just going to lie down and take it. But what they thought about, which is what I think most retailers aren't doing well enough, is what Walmart have done through their platform is play to their strengths. They've really thought about their strengths and they've played to them. So they've not tried to become a copycat Amazon. What they've actually become is a business that recognizes that they have a certain demographic and certain type of customer in the United States that really appreciates their offer and promise into the market. And what they've done is leverage that in-store network through OPG or however you want to call it, but basically delivery pickup where they can both give convenience online and choice online. They give the brands the benefit that they're not competing against third party in that format. So you're just competing against selection. You're not trying to compete against tens of millions of competitors. And what they've given then is a price promise to people where at the end of the day, consumers know if they order there and they're willing to do the last mile pickup themselves, i.e. go and get that, that big orange corner of the building and have it in American terms dropped in their trunk. It's kind of a format that is really working for Walmart, and it's really working for brands, because again, comes back to that category point. If you're a business that had glass products, if you're a business that had lots of water in your products or heavy kind of product, it was, those kind of feature type product sets out there, then actually Amazon, isn't necessarily a great platform for distribution of your products. Whereas Walmart, through LBA, is a phenomenal platform for delivery. So I think they've worked out where they'll win. And then, the second thing, and I think this is really important, is they're a company with a balance sheet where they can play in the marketplace properly. And my kind of golden rule, which I don't think people apply hard enough, is that if you really want to be serious in marketplaces today, as a retailer, you've got to be able to deploy between 8 to 10 billion of deployable capital to be in the game. And the problem is when you put that threshold in, many of the organizations that we consider sort of more legacy or kind of bricks and mortar based, particularly grocery, they're not in that game. And I think the clever ones have figured out that they, working with Instacart is the best of both worlds. And some of the, because they've just realized they don't have 8 to 10 billion to deploy to really get in the game. Whereas Walmart, they have the balance sheet, they deployed it. Everyone really questioned Jet, but I think that was a phenomenal move. They might have closed that kind of website brand, but they've taken that IP and they've taken that capability and they've put that live with a phenomenal delivery, kind of platform behind it. And they're now firmly and seriously back in the game.
Really interesting point. I mean, if you think about it from a kind of non-essential, if we're using the essential, non-essential buckets,
yeah.
Even TJ Maxx, right, has very little e-commerce penetration, but this kind of $8 to $10 billion kind of to be in the game number, some of these companies, that's their entire market cap. So how do they win? I mean, because I agree with you, e-commerce is the future.
Well, it sort of is and it isn't, right? Because the reality is it's driving growth right now. So that shift at the end of the day, let's be honest about it, it's kind of more channel shift to growth rather than it's purely net new money. I mean, I do actually, from my analysis, know that people do tend to spend more on e-commerce. So the actual wallet stretches and you do see more money spent. So there is some growth in those numbers actually in terms of total market. But that's limited. I mean, that's not, it really is mainly channel shift. But the key question for me, which is, really at the heart of the debate that we have with our brands is, that want to think about distribution or want to think about how they're making their choices, is that for some of these retailers, and we've seen some brilliant examples worldwide of people like Inditex and people like Primark. Now, you'd argue this is a slightly odd argument to present having just had COVID-19, but I genuinely believe that, a high proportion of retail will remain on the high street or in the store or at the shopping mall. And therefore, certain retailers, in my view, should just dedicate to channels and not try and play every channel. And I think the multi-channel and be a marketplace, you've got to be a very large organization. So I think if you are, in that kind of non-essential business line where, let's be honest about it, these companies, it's not like they've just tried e-commerce. I mean, they've been going at it for probably 8 to 10 years and not really proven great success. I mean, they've had some success, but nothing like the marketplace success. Is I think they've got to make hard choices about how they distribute. There is nothing wrong with bricks and mortar. It's a phenomenal distribution format. So put more and more of their capital there and then try and leverage other technology or marketplace platform plays that allow them to get into e-commerce, but at a fraction of the capital deployment. They're trying to do it themselves.
Some of the challenges, I think, for these kind of, retailers, though, is that the average tenure of a CIO is like 18 months. And since oftentimes they're setting a lot of the strategic direction, right? If you don't have a CDO, if you don't have a chief e-commerce officer, I mean, that's been, I mean, when you talk to the management teams, it's almost like this guardrail to guardrail, right? They're going kind of one direction and they're going another direction. And I think because they don't necessarily have the depth, it's led to a lot of this, you know, maybe the capital that they have spent has been the wrong direction.
Well, and I think they're competing in a market that's very tough, right? If you think about just the reward of a really high quality CIO or kind of technology CDO leader, you know, you go and work for a traditional retailer, they'll pay well, right? They'll give a good package, but you take that same individual and a tech platform turns up with a stock incentive scheme and they're going to earn 5 times more. And so the reality is that it's not fair competition. And that's the reality. It's not fair competition. So, but my question is, you know, does a retail brand and does a retailer have to be an outstanding technical specialist, or does it just need to be an outstanding retailer? And if, you know, because there are now phenomenal platforms being built and coming through, you know, we've chatted in the past about, you know, for instance, you know, if I was a retailer in the United States in that mid-tier right now, I would be spending 3 months in China figuring out between Ali, JD, and Pinduoduo, which of their basically off-the-shelf SaaS platform, retail platform with the full real-time analytics, full real-time, you know, second place auction capability, etc. So a kind of looky-like Amazon platform I could deploy for a fraction of the cost in terms of operating expense than trying to build it myself. The problem is too many retailers believe they've got to own it. And I think that I just don't see why they have to own it.
I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll turn it over to audience Q&A. So much of Double 11 and 19 was around live streaming. So I was on like the Hangzhou campus and we met with, it was amazing, right? What we saw and just kind of the volume that it drove. How do you see live streaming translate into commerce in the rest of the world?
Yeah, so I think we've just seen the biggest shift that we will see for a while in that space, right? Which is we've you know, Facebook have now turned up, right? And they've turned up in a big way with Shop. And I think, you know, I think there's sort of two schools of thought on what's happened there, right? The one school of thought is, oh, they've just done a reseller agreement with Shopify and Shopify is now basically sort of partnering and it's not real. Whereas my school of thought is that's not true at all. I mean, when you look at what Facebook is building out and the seriousness of which Mark and his company are applying to getting into commerce, that shop capability, yes, they may be partnering with Shopify today, but you can easily see how that front end will be integrated into many back ends over the next couple of years. And there is no doubt, you know, if you come back to the principle of online is all about network effect and your ability to own eyeballs, that's what defines winners and losers. You know, the reality is that Facebook turning up, that you know, there's a very big player and someone who's got a true ability to win turning up to the game. And I agree with you. I mean, when you spend any time in China and you see the impact of O2O or that kind of real live innovation, the connections that they get in the platform and how that's built into the ecosystem, it doesn't take much to imagine that even Amazon, you know, others are on the back foot on that. They've got to lean into that. And you've seen the other platforms. I mean, Pinduoduo and obviously TikTok and others in China have sort of forced even Ali and JD and others to rush into that live streaming in a way that I don't think they'd have imagined they'd be doing 2 years before that.
No, absolutely. All right, we have a lot of questions from the audience. We'll get through as many as we can. Okay. How do you think malls, shopping centers, and other in-person retailers will be reintegrated into a world so focused on e-commerce?
Yeah, so look, I think you've got to look at, you know, malls and other elements are, you know, firstly, where I come from, if you look at the detailed segmentational analysis of consumers, and I look at it, as you said, Deborah, all the time. I mean, the reality is that the act of enjoyment and entertainment in physical shopping has not gone away. COVID-19 will not stop that. If anything, I think we'll see a kind of, you know, almost like a kind of, you know, a wave back to being allowed to suddenly physically go as soon as people feel safe they'll reintroduce to that model. And so what e-com, I think, for many organizations becomes at that point is actually a top of funnel marketing promotion platform rather than necessarily having to be a full featured commerce platform. And I think that's the difference in thinking people need to think about is if you're a brand that owns phenomenal platforms, let's take a Macy's or a Limited or, businesses that have got these, have really struggled. I mean, let's be honest, they're probably one of the biggest down segments of the industry at the moment in terms of the swing. I think they focus too much on trying to compete with Amazon instead of a bit like Walmart thinking about, hang on, we've got this phenomenal experience. People want to come to it. How are we using the top of funnel to really bring them in? If we need to provide that little bit of digital experience, as in the home delivery once they've been in the store, then let's think about convenience once they're in and they've bought and make the, if you look at Alibaba, right? If you go into a Hippo store, you go in and you decide you want to eat, and then you change your mind there and then and think, no, I don't want to eat. Actually, I'm going to have that as a takeaway. And you basically click the button, you click it on your own app. And 20, 30 minutes later, your meal that you thought you were going to eat there has now arrived at your house to eat there, right? And it's the same with your products. If you don't want to take them home, you click the button, they're delivered to home, and they're delivered in the next 45 minutes. That's how I think people have got to think about partnerships and think about other organizations that have phenomenal delivery platforms. So Uber, right? Deliveroo here, Grubhub in the, these kind of, convenience food businesses that have built huge delivery networks and have got all that cost. If they could partner up with some of the retailers for physical to home and take away, make it that better, just that lift that experience again. I think there's all kinds of models there retailers could be really leveraging.
Well, it's interesting, Duncan. I mean, this whole idea of kind of, we've advised in many circumstances, but this is a whole kind of different ball of wax. Right? We've talked about outsourcing your marketing, outsourcing your IT, but this idea, in some ways, companies feel like it's their DNA to outsource kind of, but the way that you put it, I think it's truly brilliant.
Yeah, look, I mean, at the end of the day, there is, a retailer when you cut them in half, or, a kind of business like that when you cut them in half. Well, of course, they've had to automate and they've had to learn to be very efficient. I mean, these are businesses that run on unbelievably thin margins, right? So they've got to be efficient. But at the same time, in that beautiful constraint of efficiency, they really seem to have a fundamental blind spot about trying to own tech platforms. Because I think the other thing from my experience when you cut those businesses in half, these are not technology businesses. Their CEOs aren't wandering into the office in kind of chinos and t-shirts and kind of, and hoodies like Mark Zuckerberg, right? I mean, they're not, they're just coming out of a different capability set, but that's not a bad thing because they know how to run these businesses brilliantly. The difference is they're trying to then become something they're not. And I think that's the challenge. Why try and become something you're not when there are technology plays out there? And I think that's, it's almost the beauty of Kroger's relationship with Ocado. Why is Kroger suddenly going to try and build automated warehousing when they can partner with Ocado, who've proved that they can really master automated warehousing and automation at the back end? I mean, I think there's a prime example of an organization that have had the real sense to say, why would we win in that? Why aren't we partnering with a winner in that? I think it's that, I think it really is, it's what the tech industry itself, which is why I think they're so good at it, learned to do many years ago. What is your real IP and what's the bit that you really own? And then how are you building out and bringing in elements of the ecosystem to do bits that you're not really good at but just being good at connecting quickly and moving fast. And I think that's the skill retailers have got to learn.
There's a question around kind of shopping holidays. Shopping holidays have been such a significant area of growth in China. Do you think they translate outside of the East?
Yeah, well, we already know they do. Black Friday in itself in the United States is an example, and I think they're going to come because if you're a platform, let's not get too cynical about the commercialism of why platforms want holidays, the big days, but it's very simple, right? So what you want as a platform is you want stickiness of your brands. You want the best product, the greatest product from brands coming through your platform at the best prices, so consumers stay with you. That's the basic mechanic of, and your promise as a platform is you deliver huge volumes of customers who keep coming back, and as brands they build this, you know, great relationship to keep their products selling. That's the partnership. But of course, if you are the retail platform, if you are Amazon or if you are Alibaba, what that tells you is you've got to constantly keep progressing your own product to keep ahead, to make sure that relationship stays true. But there is some benefits that if you can deliver to a brand in one single day the equivalent of their annualized sales in another retail format, which, by the way, you know, if you were a brand owner, Singles Day in China in the next 3 years has every opportunity, if you get it right, of selling $1 billion of your product on a single day. If you think about how important would Alibaba be to that manufacturer at that point, I think it puts it in a nutshell. So the platforms are going to make these holiday days critical because it makes them so important then to the value chain, and manufacturers will become hugely dependent on those huge burst moments. Because you imagine if you've done $1 billion of sales through Singles Day this year, and then for whatever reason you don't, you know, you're not a feature in that Singles Days the following year, you know, everyone has to do year-on-year growth, and finding a brand new $1 billion of sales from nowhere is not going to be easy. So there's an element of course, consumers get into it. We all get into it if it's well marketeered. But at the end of the day, I think there's a hard, cynical reason that they're happening, which is it makes the platforms critical to the value chain.
Great. Well, Duncan, I can't believe we've already 30 minutes flew by. Thank you so much for your insights and your wisdom. This was truly fantastic, and we really appreciate your time today.
No, Deborah, it's been great to join you. I mean, it's been wonderful. And look, you know, if there's any follow-up, happy to do it. But you do a great job. You know, your insights on the industry are fantastic. And I look forward to your email every morning to pick up on what you teach me every day that I've missed. So
thank you, Duncan. I really appreciate it. And look forward to talking to you soon.